Okay, well, welcome, Jim Paul. Jim, how are you?
I'm doing okay, actually. It's been a busy day, but I've just been reading with a group of students Martin Shaw's Liturgies of the Wild,
Right, okay.
which is, do you know that book?
I don't know, I have to confess.
It's good. Yeah, he's a very interesting person who became a Christian about 7 years ago from a sort of shamanistic mythology background.
Right,
And
sounds
yeah,
interesting. Yeah,
it
wow.
is. It's great.
Yeah,
Quite wild.
I'm sure it is. So, Jim, I was trying to work it out. I think I've probably known you for about over 20 years. That's a scary thought, isn't it?
It
I
is.
mean,
It's
you've seen that
amazing.
I've gone a bit grayer. That was your
Yeah.
first observation before we went on air, as it were.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you haven't gone so grey, but wisdom and stress. Let's put it that way. Um, so, for those who don't know you, can you just tell us a bit about yourself, where you live, where you work? I know you've got a family. Just tell us what you want to let the listeners know a bit about yourself. That'd be great.
Yeah, so I'm currently the director of the English branch of L'Abri Fellowship, which I've been there for 20, over 20 years, live there with
Yeah.
my wife and our two boys who are grown up now in their 20s. For those who don't know what L'Abri is, it is a Christian community and study center where we give people space, time, and the resources to work through their questions about Christian faith. And let's see, before that, I was a doctor trained in palliative care and was a palliative care specialist in London.
Yeah. And have you got grown up kids now?
Yeah, they're in their 20s, yeah, mid 20s. Yeah. So we're kind of, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't I don't know what we're supposed to say when we're at this stage of life. People talk about adult kids and grown up kids, but I mean, I guess they're all adults, aren't they, really? So
Yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, one's left home, one's still with us, sort of on and off, and yeah, they're a joy. They're a
yeah,
joy. We worry a lot about our kids too, don't we? But that's
that's
life.
it. Once a parent, always a parent, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah.
And is it on the south coast of England? Is it Hampshire? Is that right?
Hampshire, yeah. So we're not far from Portsmouth. Yeah,
Right.
these beautiful sunny days. I've been able to go down to the beach and South Sea and swim, which
Yeah.
is a
You've
great
been sort of
blessing.
in the Riviera, the English Riviera
Yeah, we
almost.
are. Yes, yeah, yeah.
Sunny
Stony
up.
beaches, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, one of the things we're trying to do on this podcast is speak to people that are involved and have experience in Christian ministry, in life as a whole, and particularly interested in leadership, having been in leadership myself. And if you were to think about your 25-year-old self, Jim, which is probably a bit of a scary thought, or maybe it's not,
Hmm.
what might you say now that you're older to your 25-year-old
Right.
self?
Should this be relevant to being in leadership or just life in general?
Just life
Let's
in
see.
general, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it can be okay, some lessons you've learned, but whatever, go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the things I would say is take up bird watching. Because I've only taken up bird watching in about the last 5 or 6 years, and it's become a bit of an obsession of mine, which just brings so much joy and relaxation and yeah, interest and wonder and delight in God's creation. So I would say take it up when you're 25. Why wait till you're 50 to take it up? Um, what else would I say? Read more poetry.
Yeah.
I would definitely encourage my younger self to read more poetry and
Yeah.
learn poems that I love and let that become a rich part of my life earlier than it has done. And probably the last one would be worry less,
Yeah.
because I think yeah, I'm a worrier, prone to worry. Probably most of us are, and
Yeah.
I guess over the last 30 years or so since I was 25, I've seen God care for me through all those things. And I often think, why did I worry so much about that?
Mm.
I could have just trusted him more.
Well, I think there's an interesting connection there, isn't there? Become a bird watcher because, of course, Matthew 6, Jesus says, "Don't worry about your life. Look at the birds of the air." And
Great. Yeah.
So I remember my confession. Those who know me well know I enjoy sort of looking at, uh, goldfinches and greenfinches as well as birds of prey. But one of the things that I did in lockdown was try and teach myself bird songs. I
Oh
identify
yeah, yep.
the song, when you're going in the woods. Anyway, but anyway, great as it is, we're not a bird watching podcast, but
Could
there is a
talk for
relevance.
hours.
There is a
Yeah,
relevance.
yeah,
But go check out,
you should.
goldfinches and greenfinches and all kinds of different birds, and don't and worry less. That's it. That's good. What's come from you there? Um,
Yeah,
we are not talking about bird watching specifically, but we are talking about something called the Quiet Revival, and you've been doing a bit of thinking about that. You recently did a lecture at L'Abri. Um, I was thinking
yeah.
about this, Jim. Like, why do you think it's called the Quiet Revival and not maybe the Quiet Awakening or the Slow Awakening or something else? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I wonder because I guess the awakenings of the past, like the Great Awakening, were I think more profound cultural change went on.
Right.
And I don't think that's what we're seeing at the moment. We're seeing maybe hopefully the beginning of a wider phenomenon. We'll see what happens as we go on through the next few years, the next decade.
Yeah.
But I think with the Great Awakenings, I was thinking of a friend of mine who was telling me about the Welsh revival, for example.
Mhm.
And one of the things he says that you was written at the time is that you could tell when a Welsh miner had become a Christian by the way they treated their pit pony.
Mm.
So there was there was a cultural change of people's treatment of animals that went on as they found faith in Jesus Christ, the creator of all things. And I don't think we're seeing that at the moment. So it's just a kind of, I would call it like a bubbling under of something. And I like the word in one article I read, it said it's not a revival or an awakening, but there's a ferment going on. And
Mm.
maybe that's the kind of same as a bubbling under, but there's probably still a continuing decline overall in numbers of people going to church, particularly in the more kind of what would you call it, middle of the road denominations. But at the same time, there is, I think, a new interest in Christianity and spirituality that's going on. So there's probably sort of two things going on at the same time, a ferment. So maybe that's why, yeah, it's not an awakening yet. It's more, I call it a bubbling under of something.
Yeah, that's interesting. We'll maybe pick some of that up a little bit later. That's an interesting way of kind of trying to define it. I guess in shorthand, that's what it has been called because a report came out, didn't it?
Yeah.
Was it a couple of years ago now? Or,
Yeah, 2025, I think it was
yeah,
last year. Yeah.
yeah, last year.
May
So
last, yeah.
a report came out and in that study, it particularly said that young men in particular are going to church and converting to Christianity, reading the Bible or asking for Bibles. The report that was initially put out was withdrawn as YouGov got the stats a bit wrong.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right.
so, does that mean there isn't a revival, or there isn't anything going on, or what does that mean?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. I would still argue there is something going on, um, even if the stats at the moment are not showing that. And yeah, the original study was done by the Bible Society, and through no fault of their own, actually, it was the secular organization YouGov that they had used to do collect the data that admitted that they had made serious mistakes in doing that. The data wasn't reliable. And we'll see. I gather that they are repeating the study, but without the data problems this year, I think, to be published next year. So we'll see what that shows. And there have been other large-scale studies which have shown continuing decline in numbers of people going to church. But on the other hand, there is a lot of a lot of evidence that's pointing the other direction. And for example, I would say things like in the Catholic Church in France, for example, they have got record numbers of baptisms this Easter. And the same actually is true in the Westminster Diocese of the Catholic Church in London. Um, there are in other countries in like Sweden, Denmark, Norway are reporting increasing numbers of young people coming back to church. I think it is in Sweden. I'll have to check my facts. It's in the lecture I gave, but in one of the Nordic countries, in a secular magazine, they voted Jesus the influencer of the year recently. Um, so there's a
Like
kind
this
of
new guy on the block.
yeah, yeah. He hasn't been around very long, just 2,000 years, but he's and anecdotally, I certainly I've certainly spoken to someone that's in a small city near us. It says that their church congregation has gone up 20% in the last year, and it's nearly all young people.
Yeah.
Another elder in a church that I was talking to down in Portsmouth said how just one Sunday service they had 16-year-olds just turn up to their service and
Mm.
wanting to see what happened, and then being absolutely delighted at the end of the service when they were given a Bible to go away and read, and were just delighted and interested, And so I think there is this. Yeah, and that could be repeated. I've spoken to so many people and in all kinds of different countries where that kind of pattern is going on. And so maybe you're not getting that showing up in the data, as I said, because perhaps overall church attendance is continuing to fall. And that's because in some of the traditional denominations and sort of middle of the road churches. But there's a growing interest of young people coming, particularly to Orthodoxy, Catholicism, and Pentecostalism, but also in many other evangelical churches as well. So
Yeah.
there's definitely something going on, and
Mm.
I could talk more about that. I mean, there's also another area where something really interesting is happening. Is many people who are I wouldn't quite call them perhaps celebrities, but influential people in a whole lot of disciplines are becoming Christians, or certainly coming close to becoming Christians. And
Right.
I think this actually, the first one I would think about would be Jordan Peterson. He sort of kick-started this interest in the Bible and in spirituality in the lectures that he gave. I think in 2016 or 17, gave a whole series of lectures on the Bible and looking at the stories from a psychological point of view. Then you've got people like Tom Holland, who's certainly calls himself a cultural Christian now, and his book Dominion, arguing that actually our culture is and the values of culture are not based on Enlightenment values, but on Christian ones. Um, in the music world, people like Nick Cave,
Mm.
who've has come back to his faith.
Yeah.
Um,
So do you think it'd
anyway,
be
I
fair
could
to say, I
go
mean,
on and on.
on the back of what you said there, I think it certainly would be fair to say when I used to work with university students, 25 years ago, the predominant thing in universities when I would go and speak at a mission week would be New
Hmm.
Atheism, Richard
Yes, yeah,
Dawkins. So right away, you had this defense against you, which was that Christianity is not plausible, it's not believable, God is a delusion. And so anybody that had just, read the latest thing or read the latest book would have this opposing argument. They weren't really open
yeah,
at all.
yeah,
And yet it
yeah,
was like kind of trying to walk through cement in many ways in
yeah,
terms of apologetics. But there's definitely been a shift. And I was just thinking as you were
yeah,
describing those people, Jim, like Jordan Peterson and Tom Holland and Nick Cave, I just wonder whether so there's definitely been a shift, hasn't there,
yeah,
from
yeah,
new atheism and closedness to maybe
yeah,
an openness to
yeah,
Christianity as a worldview, but that doesn't
yeah.
necessarily mean they're necessarily totally open to the gospel, are they? In terms of or
No,
becoming Christians per se,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think for many people, it's they don't. I mean, they don't. They've become. I would say, it's an openness in a way to something beyond the material
Yeah.
worldview of the new atheists, and I, I, I think now, the new atheism is. I often call it a change in the plausibility construct. That's the kind of sociological term to do with
Yeah.
what is plausible in our culture, in our society, and previously it would have been, new atheism was totally plausible and Christianity was implausible. But I think that's almost shifted the other way around now. I think very few people buy the, materialistic atoms and, blind chance is all that there is behind the universe,
Mm.
for various reasons we could go into. And I think new atheism itself has sort of became it's interesting with the advent of woke. It became a very divided movement because people within new atheism suddenly discovered what they stand against was religion, but they had no idea in one sense what they stand for
Mm.
and the values, and it's split between a more kind of conservative atheists, tending, the kind of the philosophers, for example, and then the kind of atheist social activists. And so they suddenly discovered that actually this belief in no God, it doesn't really give you a set of values. And this is a time when I think what we desperately need as a culture, and I think people are feeling that more and more, is a set of values to live by as a culture, as a society that bind us together rather than just our consumeristic individualism.
Mm.
So there's an opening, and you're right. I mean, it's an opening to something beyond, and I think, another expression, it's got to be said, is not towards Christianity, but towards, say, kind of new spiritualities, or towards people kind of rediscovering pagan spiritualities and Wicca, and becoming sort of Vikings and all that kind of thing that we see
Yeah.
going on
Yeah.
as well. A great book called Strange Rites by Tara Isabella Burton, and she really explores that kind of world of these new spiritualities. So there's that, yeah, there's that going on. But many people, what's really happening is it's not people sort of going back to the faith of their childhood. It's really people discovering Christianity for the first time, I would
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
a lot of these people.
Yeah.
And so they don't yet know, in a sense, what the message is, but they're interested in this ancient faith that might
Yeah.
have something to say to them.
I absolutely agree. And having not spoken in universities for about 20 years, the last 2 years, I have been going in and speaking in universities again. And I couldn't believe the openness of students. I mean,
Mm,
two quick examples. 2 years ago, I was coming across people talking about manifesting and being open to kind
yeah,
of
yeah,
spirituality. Then on the other side, you've got people who are really investigating Christianity. They've come from a Hindu background or a Muslim background or
yeah.
not believing in anything background, and
Mm,
where you would struggle to get any probably honest questions at the end of a talk, I
mm,
was finding
mm.
that I was having half an hour conversation before I even got to do the talk, with
Yeah,
questions.
right,
So,
right. Yeah,
there's
yeah, yeah.
definitely a hunger to learn, and some people have equated this to first century Christianity. There's just no background of people that have
Yeah,
any
yeah,
understanding of what the gospel is, what the Bible is. So we're starting from scratch, aren't we? In many
yeah,
ways.
yeah,
One of the things that I was
yeah.
just thinking about in terms of, you touched on orthodoxy here, and
Mm,
as I kind of stood back from like the report that came out and a lot of the discussion that's happened since, Jim, I kind of thought, right, we've got a lot of stats, and there's a lot of talk of young men going to church. There's a lot of talk of people going towards orthodoxy or going towards Catholicism.
hmm.
And one of the things that the report doesn't really tell us is anything sort of theological, like, well, what do these people actually believe, or do they
Mm,
understand who
mm.
Jesus is,
Yeah,
or do they understand what salvation is? But
yeah.
with it, I'm particularly intrigued by, in your lecture, you spoke about this shift to do with Orthodox bros,
Right,
and,
right.
and
Yeah,
how
yeah,
the
yeah.
Christianity appeals to a certain type of male who
Yeah,
who desires orthodoxy.
yeah,
What
yeah,
does that look like? Why do you think there's a shift towards that? And is that healthy
yeah,
or unhealthy? What's your observations on that?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I was thinking about this desire, yeah, for something beyond, and and for something maybe that has mystery and wonder in it. And I think I was thinking about there are various ways which this new interest in Christianity can be misdirected. And one of those ways could be into, for example, I mean, in the lecture I go through, it could be nationalism, for example. I mean, Tommy Robinson
Mm,
has now said he's a Christian, for example, leader of one of the, one of the far right parties in the UK, and you can see marches where you got a Union Jack with a crucifix in the middle of it, and I mean, to me that is total anathema, this of co-opting Christianity for nationalism, for example. And I think this is probably true. This could be true in many different ways, but that perhaps for some of the interest for some people is, again, it's part of our modern culture, the kind of self-actualization that is a deep part of our modern culture, and the expressive individualism. So it is just another way of kind of becoming a better me. Only this is a kind of religious, disciplined, religious way of becoming a better me. And I think that, the kind of ortho bros, that was a phrase I came across on the Substack post about orthodoxy, this turn to orthodoxy, written by someone actually who'd become orthodox about 5 years ago, and then was writing about that experience. And so that, it part of that could feed into this current need there is in our culture for many young men to rediscover what it means to be a man, what it means to be masculine, and a kind of way of, like, yeah, hard spiritual disciplined life, of a kind of asceticism, spiritual disciplines.
mm,
But on the other hand, don't want to talk about it entirely in a negative way. I think there is amongst people.
mm,
I mean, one of the things that I talk about, if we go back to the new atheism, is the world that new atheism and our, enlightenment philosophy that we've been under, modernity, post-modernity, it has been termed a disenchanted world. We live in this world where everything has become molecules and physical processes and just time and chance, and there's no mystery or wonder in it. And I think a deep need in people is they want mystery, they want wonder,
mm,
they want something beautiful in their worship, and they want something to worship, rather than just as we're taught in our modern culture to worship ourselves and our own desires. And obviously, I could see that fitting quite well with Orthodoxy and Catholicism, where if you go into a divine liturgy or you go to Catholic Mass, there is a sense of mystery. There is a sense of, again, something that is historically rooted in the past. It's not just a modern invention of the self. It's something beautiful. You go into an Orthodox church and you've got all the icons and the mosaics on the walls and the gold, um, and the priests and what they wear and the chanting and all those things. So there is this wonderful, yeah, there's a kind of connection with beauty and awe and wonder, and I think that's a drive for people, an attraction for people, and I maybe that's a challenge to many
yeah,
evangelical churches that,
yeah,
if you just worship in a, um, I don't know, let's say, a building that's a bit like an office or like a cinema or something,
yeah, yeah,
that's maybe just saying, well, this is functional or this is entertainment.
yeah.
But that sense, that desire for mystery and for wonder is missing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and that's really interesting to observe that because I think what we've seen, haven't we, historically, is that philosophy and theology kind of parallel one another. There's an influence of on theological thinking and how churches operate, and I think what you we've got in the recent sort of challenges of those who are desiring maybe orthodoxy more is that in the last 30 years, where particularly evangelical churches have come out of a seeker friendly kind of environment,
Yeah,
will make our churches look like everyday life and going to the cinema or
yeah,
going to the
yeah,
leisure club, and then people don't see a distinction of it. And so I think maybe the challenge is to say, well, doctrine is okay, order is okay, but actually having a doctrine of creation that's reflected in
yeah,
our
yeah.
buildings.
Oh,
There's a level of course, we want orthodoxy in terms of not just reinventing the wheel, but I
yeah,
think the
yeah.
challenge is if people don't see that within many modern evangelical churches, the challenge is they'll probably go for that orthodoxy elsewhere, but
Mm.
miss, the freedom of the gospel, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I talk in the lecture I gave, I talked about, these three desires that I think there are quite strongly amongst people. And one is I said for for in a sense that yeah, mysticism for actually something that is a real encounter with God,
Yeah.
rather than again, this could be a critique of many of our conservative evangelical churches, where the sermon is more sort of information about God
Mm.
rather than a service being meeting with God,
Yeah.
an encounter with Him that really transforms and changes you. And I think that's what people want. They don't want a dry intellectualism, a cognitivism. They want actually to meet with God and be changed, be spoken to, which is, I mean, exactly really what we would want to happen in an
Which is
evangelical
why some
church.
of the stats on the other end, the Pentecostalism, probably appealed on another level, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, and that would be a different kind of way of encountering God. Yeah, Pentecostalism. And then the other two things that I think are um, people want is I said and is aesthetic and aesthetic. So yeah, the desire for beauty, something again that is beautiful and kind of full of wonder and mystery. And then I talk about an ascetic, in other words, like spiritual disciplines. Actually, people are saying, I want young people actually saying, I want something that's a bit tough, that's a bit demanding in a way. I don't want the seeker-friendly massage my ego Jesus, I don't want the, just that self-actualization that we're told all the time in our culture. I actually want something that maybe pushes me a bit, demands something of me. And what I think, where I think actually that evangelical churches have got a real place here is that I think again these desires can become misdirected so that we can replace God with beauty, for example. We can mistake beauty for the experience of God. Obviously, they're deeply connected, aren't they? But they're
Mm.
not quite the same thing. And we can mistake the spiritual disciplines as the path of faith. And what we need in there is I call it a kind of I call it a mysticism of grace, an aesthetics of grace and an ascetics of grace, so that actually the center of where we need to direct and point people to is to the Lord Jesus Christ and his saving work, as Francis Schaeffer, the founder of L'Abri Communities, would say, his finished work on the cross
Mm.
and the power of the Holy Spirit in our lives, and his grace in our lives. So that I would say, I think I often use the phrase to say the mysticism of grace, which is actually we really want to encounter God in His grace,
Yeah.
in His forgiveness, in His Jesus dying for our sins and rising again, and
Mm.
in the power of the Holy Spirit to overcome our sinfulness. Where the spiritual disciplines in that are important, but actually it's gracious power and working of God in us that changes
Mhm.
us. So
Mm.
that's where I kind of actually do think that the evangelical churches have a real voice in this, actually, to direct
Yeah,
people towards the grace of God.
yeah, absolutely. In that sort of way of thinking, just literally got a couple of minutes left, Jim.
Yeah.
What do you think we can learn from this? Just if you were to sort of summarize or add anything else into this conversation, what's next in terms of this study's been done, it's going to be revised. What can
Yeah.
we sort of learn from it? What's next?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I would like to encourage evangelical churches to really take up this challenge, and to really, yeah, try to meet these people and what they're looking for. Um, and I think, you know, I think part of that, there is a real, and what I think a really helpful challenge here to many evangelical churches is to make sure that we're not just churches of a dry intellectualism, for example, or just a kind of cognitivism where we pay, just mental assent to God, but to actually see our church services as places where people encounter the living God through His Word and are changed by that. I'd also encourage places to think deeply about beauty, churches, evangelical churches, to think deeply about beauty, because beauty matters. God is a God of beauty. Just look at His creation. Look at back to the goldfinches and the green finches and
Yeah.
all those beautiful birds that are in our fields and in our gardens.
Mm.
So he's a God of endless creativity and beauty,
Yeah.
and also to actually recapture a proper ascetics, a proper sense of the spiritual disciplines, and how those can be means which open us to the grace of God. For example, I'll give you an example. We don't often talk about fasting in evangelical circles, but at the Bree we try to practice at least once a term. We have a fast, a day of fasting and prayer. And fasting is an amazing thing because what it does is you realize pretty quickly by the time you missed one meal that
Mm.
you're utterly, utterly dependent on food
Mm.
for energy, for energy to do things. But also, you start to become bad tempered without a meal, and you realize your nice, holy exterior is
Yeah.
pretty dependent on having food. And it suddenly brings you into this deep sense of your fragileness, your finiteness, and your deep dependence on God. And then of His grace for you, that He will meet you in that need in His grace.
Yeah.
So, thinking about, yeah, those kind of spiritual disciplines in that kind of way that lead you to grace, it's
Yeah.
just crucial.
That's brilliant. Well, we've covered so much in such a short space of time. We're going to wrap it up there, and hopefully, it will make people kind of want more. And if they want more, this podcast is on Spotify, but also Labrie have a podcast on Spotify as well. You can hear Jim's lecture on that in full, and
Yeah,
there's Q&A in that after that. I'll put some links to that on this podcast, also to Labrie as well. People can find out more about that. But it's been
yeah.
brilliant to connect again and to have you on
Good to
here.
see you again,
And
Clive.
maybe
Yeah,
we've just raised some more questions, which is fine,
yeah,
but we'll just keep exploring it and praying
yeah.
that we'll see a change as people inquire more of who Jesus is. Yeah.
Great.
Great. Thanks so much for your
Thanks,
time, Jim.
Clive. Yeah, lovely to be with you.
Okay, thanks again. Bye.